A little over a year ago, we spent a little bit of time in the Mojave Desert surrounding Las Vegas in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. When I say a little bit of time, I mean about 4 days. In those 4 days, it quickly became one of my favorite places in the United States. You could go from the lowest part of the lower 48 to almost the highest part of the lower 48 within 1 hour drive, and this is our journey through this area of the United States. No trip to the desert is complete without stopping in a location that sounds slightly threatening. Today we're in Death Valley National Park. Heading west from Las Vegas, we make our way through the Red Rock Conservation Area to the small town of Pahrump, Nevada. We made our way to what I'm going to call a ghost town of the Amagrosa town, which is right outside of Death Valley National Park. This was built in the 1920s, and this was originally a company town for the borax mines in the area. This was our last stop before we made our way into the national park. While we were in Death Valley, the park had experienced some rain in the months prior to our visit, and this developed a lake in the Badwater Basin, which is the driest spot in the United States. This lake is known as Lake Manly, and this is the view from what is called Dante's View. To the west, you can see the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, which are the highest mountains in the lower 48, as well as Badwater Basin, which is the lowest point in the lower 48, meaning the highest and lowest point in the United States are about 50 miles apart from one another. Continuing our way through the park, we stopped at Zabriskie Point to capture some of these photos. We visited Death Valley about a year before this, and I'm much happier with how the photos of this trip turned out. The view we saw of the lake earlier was from above, and now we actually went down to the lake at Badwater Basin. Since this lake was formed on a salt flat, this was the saltiest water I had ever been in, and my feet and hands were totally dry for the rest of the day. But we got to go and walk through the lake, which hardly ever exists, and we got some of these really cool photos like this kayaker on the lake. After drying off and changing clothes, after spending some time in Lake Manly, we headed towards our sunset spot, which would be Mesquite Flats Sand Dunes. And what's a road trip without a little bit of construction to go along with it? We chose Mesquite Flats Sand Dunes for our sunset spot again. We did this last year also, but this is a very convenient spot for us since our next destination is Lone Pine, and this is probably only a 50-minute drive from here. We stayed a little bit into dusk to get some of these nice blue hour photos. I particularly like this area because you can just walk through the dunes forever and every view is going to be different. I really like this photo of this stick in the moon. With that, we headed back to the car to our next destination, which was Lone Pine in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, specifically Alabama Hills. Today we're heading into what I would consider one of the prettiest places in the United States, and honestly better than a lot of national parks I've been to. We're headed to Alabama Hills. This area is located in California. It's on the west side of Death Valley National Park, which is probably the most convenient route to get here, and it's on the base of the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, right outside of the town of Lone Pine. We're staying in that said town of Lone Pine for about 2 days. We're here in the eastern Sierras photographing some mountains, sunrises, and sunsets. We visited in mid-February, so it was still pretty cold, but the benefit of this was there was hardly any crowds, especially in the morning. We were the only people in the recreation area. The first morning sunrise wasn't very good. There wasn't much color hitting the mountains, which would have been great because the way the mountains are oriented here, it's better for sunrise than it is for sunset. But we had a few other things to do that day, so we packed up the car and we headed up north to Manzanar Internment Camp, which would be our next stop after we finished up taking some photographs in Alabama Hills. Manzanar is about a 30-minute drive from Lone Pine and definitely worth a stop for anybody coming through the area up the 395 highway. On our way back to Lone Pine, we found some back roads that I'm not entirely sure we were supposed to be driving on, but luckily they connected us directly to Alabama Hills. So on our way through, we were able to stop and take a few more photos before we headed back into Lone Pine to get some dinner before we headed out for sunset. But before that, we headed up the road to Mount Whitney. Mount Whitney is the highest peak in the lower 48, and it's actually accessed right here through Alabama Hills. A funny story, while we were headed up to Mount Whitney, we had about a half a tank of gas in our rental car, and when we got to the top, the road was so steep that the car actually registered that we didn't have any gas, and we were really worried we weren't going to be able to make it back down. We coasted down the hill until the car registered that we actually had gasoline in it again, so take that for some advice if you're visiting the area. And from my understanding, in warmer months, so summer, you could probably see people climbing Mount Whitney. Lone Pine is a cool little mountain town, lots of old and cool trucks throughout the area, and definitely some cool motels that are worth checking out. We just didn't stay at any of these. We headed back into the park for sunset. We headed to this area, which we were at for sunrise also. It's called Movie Row. If you've seen movies such as Iron Man and a lot of old westerns, a lot of these movies were actually filmed in Alabama Hills for its nice western landscapes. Movie Road got its name through that. So we headed back up there to set up for sunset, and this is where I probably got one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. I really love the snow-capped peaks of the Eastern Sierras with the desert landscape as well as the cactus in the foreground. This definitely made for one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. After watching the moonrise, we headed back into Lone Pine to get ready for our next day in Alabama Hills. Before we went back to the hotel, though, we stopped in town to check out some of the neon lights on some of the hotels. We got up for sunrise and headed back into Alabama Hills like we did the previous morning, but just like that other morning, the sunrise was a little bit of a bust. We didn't get any good photos. We got some nice photos midday, but we also did this hike to Mobius Arch. In this arch, you can see the Eastern Sierra Nevada mountains through an arch, which is pretty cool and something you would see in somewhere like Arches National Park. The hike is pretty easy, probably about a mile round trip, and you can park right at the trailhead, and we were the only ones on here again, which was definitely really nice. You can see just a few other people while we were there. Before heading out, we made sure to grab a few photos of Mount Whitney, which again is the tallest point in the lower 48, which is really cool because it's only about 50 miles from the lowest point in the lower 48, which is Badwater Basin, which I talked about in a video previously to this. On our way out of town, we checked out some old cars and we headed back towards Death Valley, as that was our route back to Las Vegas. If you watched the previous video, you would have seen that Death Valley had a lot of water while we were there. This resulted in somewhat of a super bloom with some desert flowers popping up throughout the landscape. We made one last quick stop at the sand dunes before we decided to hit a few more spots in Death Valley before heading back to Las Vegas for our next two destinations, which would be the Mojave Desert as well as the Red Rock Conservation Area. Today we're continuing our road trip through the American Southwest with stopping in the ever so famous Mojave Desert. Our first stop was Roy's Cafe on the historic Route 66, and believe it or not, we were the first photographers ever to visit this location and got the first photos of it. Following our stop in Amboy, we decided to head up through the Mojave Desert on the I-15 headed back towards Las Vegas while making some stops along the way. While driving through the desert, don't expect to see a lot of other people, but you might see a train, a lot of Joshua trees, a little bit of wildlife, and definitely a lot of heat. Personally, I found the Mojave Desert to have a better assortment of Joshua trees than actually Joshua Tree National Park. So if you like Joshua Tree, the Mojave Desert, probably a good spot for you to check out as well. It's also far less crowded than Joshua Tree National Park, so keep that in mind. While driving through the desert, you'll get to experience a few different ghost towns. I don't know if I want to call them ghost towns because I do believe some people live in them, but they're pretty close to ghost towns. These towns are Kelso and Nipton. Make sure when you go through Kelso, you stop and visit the train station. When we were checking out some of these abandoned buildings, I checked out this old post office, and there's actually a way to get in the back side of it. I went in and saw some obvious signs somebody was living there, so got out of there pretty quickly. Continuing through the Mojave, you'll get to experience a few more different settlements along the way, such as this little area, as well as the town of Good Springs, which is an old town on the south of Las Vegas. Making your way back into Las Vegas, this is probably a good spot to base yourself for the end of the trip. We stayed here for one night. The next morning, we were able to get up and go check out Red Rock King, and this was one of the windiest days that we have ever experienced. It was still a really fun experience. Make sure you make reservations ahead of time. We didn't. It was totally fine, but they do encourage it.